Please remember that the complete information for the class that you are about to view is at elithecomputerguy.com. Not only do we have our videos there, but we have part lists, diagrams, pictures, and even complete code examples. So if you are watching this video and you want more information, please go to elithecomputerguy.com. Welcome back. As you know, I am Eli the Computer Guy, and in today's class I'm going to show you how to parse the NMAP XML output file and put that data into a MySQL database table. So in the previous class I showed you how to parse the XML output file and then turn the data within that file into variable values. Now that we have that data as variable values, I'm now going to show you how to input those values into a MySQL database table. Why this becomes very useful is then this is an easy way to be able to store your data so that you can then run scripts off of this data going into the future. So if you want to do things such as reports, so see how many Apple computers you have on the network or how many Netgear devices you have on the network, once the values are actually sitting in a database table, it's very easy to do something such as a SQL statement and then basically just simply be able to print out the reports. So today what we're going to be doing is we're going to be parsing that NMAP XML output file. We will be turning that data into variable values. We will then be inputting those variable values into a MySQL database table, and then after that we will then also create a small script to actually be able to pull those values back out of the MySQL database table and print those values onto a screen to show you a basic report. So today I'm going to be showing you how to be able to parse the XML file, turn that data in the XML file into values for variables, take those values for variables, put them into a MySQL database table, and then have another script that will be able to go into that MySQL database table, be able to pull out those values again, and be able to print them out onto basically a web page as a type of report. So that's what we're going to be doing today. So there's no major warnings for today's class other than it's simply not a beginner level class. You're going to need to know a bit about technology in order to be able to follow along with this class, so just kind of keep that in mind if you're a new person. If you're new in the technology world, feel free to continue watching this video, but just realize it'll probably go over your head relatively quickly. So in order to be able to do this class, you do need to understand a basic Linux system administration. You're going to need to understand basic PHP coding, and you're going to need to understand basic MySQL database administration. So I have classes on all of those, so feel free to go back and watch those tracks to get up to speed to be able to watch this particular video. But just so you know, again, this is not an entry-level thing. You're going to have to know SQL statements, you're going to need to know PHP code, and you're going to have to know how to deal with the Linux world. Beyond that, the only other thing that I will warn you about is whenever you're using NMAP, so basically with NMAP, this is a network scanning utility. For a particular reason, if you do not use sudo before you run nmap and output the results, it will not give you the MAC addresses, and so it will not give you the vendor information for your devices on the network. So if you simply do nmap 192.168.1.0/24 with the pointing to the output file. If you simply do that without the sudo in the beginning, it'll give you all the information other than the MAC address and the vendor. So it'll give you the IP address, it'll give you the ports, it'll give you that type of thing, but it will not give you that MAC address. If you want the MAC address and then the vendor information, you actually do have to do sudo nmap, and then the rest of the command is just one of those weird things. Also, if you're firing this off using a cron job, so basically cron jobs are a way of automating processes within the Linux world. So when you use cron tab, it's important to understand if you're going to go in and edit cron tab, do sudo cron tab --e and then edit the cron tab file there versus cron tab --e. If you do cron tab --e, then basically any script that fires is not going to be run under the root privilege command, so you will not get the MAC addresses and therefore the vendor information. So if you are going to be running the nmap utility, always do it under sudo in order to be able to get the MAC address and the vendor information. So basically with that, let's go over to the whiteboard. So I'll kind of explain to you, I'll draw out exactly what's going to be happening with the code today, and then we'll sit down, I'll show you what we'll be building, and I will show you how it actually gets created. Okay, so the first thing that I want to do today is kind of diagram out logically what is happening, what we are dealing with, and then we'll go over and take a look at the results and take a look at the code itself. But I think it's very important to logically understand what we're trying to accomplish before we actually get down to looking at the code. So the first thing that we have to understand is that we have our nice little Linux box. So I have an Ubuntu Linux box. On this Ubuntu Linux box, I have Apache, I have PHP, I have MySQL, and of course I have NMAP. So these are all the utilities that we're going to be needing today to actually make this code work. So Apache is the web server, PHP is the back-end programming language. This is what is going to actually go through and parse the XML file and dump that information into the database and then be able to pull the information back out of the database. We have the MySQL, that's the database itself, and then we have NMAP. NMAP is the utility that actually does the network scanning and then will output the results to the XML file. So the first thing that we're going to be dealing with is we're going to be dealing with NMAP. So again, when we run NMAP, I would recommend that you run NMAP as sudo nmap and then the rest of the code. But basically what we're going to be doing with NMAP is we are going to be running NMAP and then we are going to be outputting the results of NMAP into an XML file. So basically on our Linux server, we are going to have the HTML folder. So the HTML folder is the root web server folder. And the first thing that we're going to be doing is we're going to output the NMAP XML file into that HTML folder, so it is then sitting there and is ready to be parsed. Once we have done that, I'm then going to have a parsing script. So I'm going to have a script called nmap parse.php. And so with PHP, what we're going to do is we are going to read this XML file. We're going to pull out all of the data that we find useful, and we are then going to dump that into a MySQL database table. So PHP is going to go in, it's going to read this information, it's then going to dump all of this information into records in a MySQL database table. Once all the information has been put into that MySQL database table, we are then going to have a report script. So we're going to have another script in PHP, and basically what's going to happen is if somebody goes to the www, basically goes to the website for this PHP report script, what PHP is going to do is it's going to read from the MySQL database table. It is then going to format the information that it finds and then basically print that out in the web browser from the client computer for the person that's seeing it. So with this, we have NMAP. So NMAP is going to scan the network. The results are going to be put into an XML file that is going to sit in the HTML folder. PHP is then going to read this file, dump the results from what it's been able to parse into the MySQL database table. And then what's going to happen is when somebody goes to the PHP script that we have that's public, when they go here, that PHP script is then going to read from the MySQL database table and then we'll print out a report to the client computer. So this is a basic, logically what's happening with what we're trying to do with the project today. So let's go over and actually take a look at the results, and then I will show you how to code everything. So here we are at my demonstration computer, and I've pulled up the two PHP scripts that we're going to be dealing with today. So I have an nmap parse.php script and an nmap report.php script. These are sitting on my Linux server at 192.168.1.25. So this is the parsing script itself. So this is the script that's going through, it's parsing that nmap XML output file, and then it's inputting the variable values that it's able to pull out of that file into the database. So this looks a lot like kind of like the report mechanism that we use in our previous class. The only difference here is I've added on the component to actually then take all these variable values and then plug all these variable values into a MySQL database table. So what this does is it reads through basically that XML output file. It prints out the information that it finds. So it finds one device, 192.168.1.1. It's a Netgear device. This is the MAC address. address, this is the host name, port number, different port numbers here, the whole 9 yards. So this is what we saw in our previous class. But at the end here, basically what happens is that there's a SQL statement that fires off to input all the values here into the MySQL database table. And if that works how it's supposed to, then it simply prints this out here: data added 192.168.1.1, MAC address, vendor, host name, ports, and then a timestamp here. You know me, I always like my timestamps. So we go down to this device here, again, 192.168.1.2, an Apple device, MAC address, ports, and this is the information that was then inputted into the table. So basically, every time this particular script fires off, it will then import all the values from that XML output file into our MySQL database table. We can then go over and then we can take a look at the actual report that spits out. So basically with this, what's happening is this NMAP report.php script, it is reading through that MySQL database table and then presenting the information to us in a very easy to read fashion. So I can refresh here. Basically, this shows us the different import times. So it's saying an import time at 11:11, I think this was yesterday, on the 6th day of July. Basically, these are the IP addresses that were found. These were the MAC addresses that were found. These are the vendors for those MAC addresses. These were the ports that were open. And then this is the time code. This is the timestamp for when this information was imported. If we go down here, basically we can see that everything is then grouped based off of the timestamp. So scan at 8:30 actually today. These are the devices that were found. These are the IP addresses that were found. These are the MAC addresses. It doesn't have as much vendor information for this particular scan. These are the ports that were found, and again, these are the time codes. So this is the kind of report that we're going to be pulling out. And then again, the nice thing with being able to do something such as being able to pull out these values from a MySQL database table is I can then build this report however I like. So right now it looks pretty nice because I'm actually just simply using a table. I'm using a basic HTML table, and so using a basic HTML table, I'm able to lay out this page so everything is basically in line and the formatting is relatively easy to understand. I could use different colors here. I could underline. I could use different colors for lines, the whole 9 yards. So this is basically what the end results will be. This script here, every time this script runs, it will actually parse the file. So if I simply refresh again, and then I refresh this one, if we go all the way down to the bottom, basically as we can see here, scan at 10:17. We can see the time here is at 10:17. So basically this is when it was imported. And so when I refreshed this parse script, that automatically went through and reparsed everything, and then that was added here, and basically we get these results. So this is a way you're able to read from that XML output file, dump the information into the table, and then be able to pull out the information from that table and do a pretty little report like this. So with that, let's go over to the actual server so I can show you a little bit about how the MySQL database table has been created, a little bit about the structure on the server, and then we'll go take a look at the code. So here we are at the server. Again, I'm using Ubuntu. I'm using the desktop version of Ubuntu simply because it's easier to show you folks what's going on, but everything that I'm showing you today can be used on the basic command line server version of Ubuntu. The first thing is, again, we have Apache installed onto this particular server, and one of the things that I've done is the HTML folder. So the HTML folder, so var www HTML, this is the root directory that users are directed to when they come to your web server. One of the things that I have done is I have simply changed the owner of the HTML folder to myself. So CHOWN, I changed the owner of the folder to myself, and then I changed the permissions, CHMOD, to 777 for the folder and everything inside the folder. This is not good from a security perspective, to be 100% clear, but it makes it easier, again, for playing around in demonstration and lab type environments. So I am the owner of the the HTML folder, and I have changed the permissions to 777. So when I want to start doing things such as writing in to the HTML folder from NMAP, I don't run into any kind of weird issues. Once we get into the HTML folder, basically we have this NMAP parse.php script. And so what's going to happen here is this NMAP parse.php script is going to go and it's going to read through nmap output.xml. So if I basically open this up with the text editor, what we can see is this is the output from nmap in XML format on all the information that it was able to find when it was scanning the network. So here's the IP address for this particular device, here's a MAC address for this particular device, here's the vendor for this particular device, the whole 9 yards. So basically you can go through here, and this gives us all the information that nmap was able to find, but it gives it in a very ugly format. So again, here's all the ports for this particular device that are open. So what we want to do is we want to actually just simply be able to go and be able to read this information easily without having to sort through all this XML. So that's what that parsing script is going to do. So that parsing script, basically that's going to send the information to the database, and then we are going to have the nmap report.php script that is then going to read from the database and then print out the information in a easy to read format for us. If we go over, I just want to show you what the database looks like. So we can do sudo MySQL. Password is 123456, super secret password because you know how I am. So if we're here, just to show you, show databases. So basically I have a database here for NMAP. So this is the database that we're going to be using. So we use NMAP. So we go into NMAP. Then we do show tables to show the tables in the NMAP database. And the only table we have is log. So basically all of this information is simply going to be put into the log table. And then we can do describe log to describe what's in that table. And so basically these are the fields that we're dealing with. So we have a log underscore ID. So this is basically just a ID number for each particular entry into the log file. This is the only one that is an int. It is a primary key, and it's an auto increment. So again, whenever you're dealing with a MySQL database table, you're going to have a primary key that is unique. Making it an int that auto increments is the easiest way to do that. And so I like doing things the easiest way. Then past that, we have a field for IP address. I have simply made this text. Again, text is one of those nice things. If it's text, you can dump anything into it. Again, when you are playing around, when you're doing demonstrations, when you're doing projects, start with what's easiest and then refine to what you really need. And so again, when I'm simply dumping information into a database table, if you use the wrong data type for the information that you're putting into the table, then it'll fail. Like when you try to input information, when you try to insert information into that table, it'll fail because it's the wrong data type. So one of the things that I like to do is I make everything a text data type, and then once I verify that the project is working, then I go back and I refine the data types to what they quote unquote should be. So basically what we have here is we have an IP address, basically IP text, we have a MAC text, we have a vendor text, we have a host name text, we have a ports text, and then we have a timestamp. So this is the timestamp for when that parse script actually reads all the information and then dumps it into the table. This is what the timestamp is going to be. So this is what the server itself looks like. So with that, let's go over and take a look at the code. So here we are back in my demonstration computer where I have VS Code brought up, and I have the two PHP scripts that we're dealing with today. So we have nmap parse.php and nmap report.php. So this script right here is when we go over, this is the script that we're dealing with. So what this is going to do is it's going to read through that XML file, it's then going to print out the information onto the screen, and at the exact same time, it's then going to also insert that information into the database table. So let's take a look at this. So with this, a lot of this script here looks like the project that we just did. I just added a little bit more on, did a couple of modifications, so this will work with the MySQL database table. So the first thing that we're going to do here is that we have to say what the file we're reading is. So basically, we're going to create the variable file, we're going to use a function file, and we're going to point this to nmap output.xml. So whatever XML file you are trying to parse, this is what you plug in here. You don't have to have any folder structure because it's in the same directory as where this PHP script is. So that's one of the things you should be thinking about from a permission standpoint, like with where nmap outputs the file. Do you want to have that file outputted into the HTML directory, or do you want to output it into another directory and then have the PHP script have to go to where it is? I'm dumping everything in the HTML directory just to make it easier for me to understand the code, but this is something you'll have to be thinking about from a security standpoint. Past that, we are then going to go and we're going to take a look at the MySQL server. So we're going to have the connection for the MySQL server. For this, it is a local host. I then have a user called nmap_user. It is important to understand for this particular user, I granted all privileges to the log table, basically the NMAP database log table. I granted all privileges, and that's it. So basically, again, that's one way to kind of restrict permissions. Basically deal with security is by restricting what somebody can actually do in the MySQL database itself. So with the nmap_user has all privileges to nmap.log, and that's it. Password is super secret 123456, and then the database that it's going to be connecting to is nmap. We're then going to have the MySQL connection. It's going to be a new MySQL server name, username, password, database. Then we're going to try to do the connection. So if we're able to connect, this is what we normally do, again with MySQL and PHP and all that. If there's a failure, it's going to spit out what the error is. Past that, we're then going to come down here, and I'm going to set up all the variables now. I'm going to create all the variables now. So I'm going to create a variable for IP address, MAC address, vendor, host name, and then I have 3 variables for ports. So it's important to understand what's going on here, right? So basically, when I dump all the values for the ports into the database table, I'm going to have to dump them in as a string. So when you go and you take a look at basically how the script collects the ports, it collects the ports individually. So what I'm going to have to do is basically with my script, I'm going to collect the ports individually. I'm then going to dump them into an array. And then I'm going to implode the array and basically turn it back out to a string. So I'm going to have an array. I'm going to add the values to the array. And then once I'm done, I'm then going to turn the array into a string and then dump that whole string into the field within the database. I'll kind of show you how that goes when we get there. And then finally, we have the timestamp here. So basically, every time we get a port, so we're individually going to get a port, we're going to assign that value to the port variable. Then basically, we're going to put that value into the port array, and then we are going to implode the port array, and that's going to come up with the variable value for port list. That'll then be a string. We're then going to input that into the MySQL database table. Then we're going to come down here, and basically we're just going to go through and get the variable values much like we did before. So this looks like the project that we just did. So again, this is for each, so it's stepping through the file. So it goes line per line in the file. So it goes through the file, and then for the first line, it's going to say if, and then the string position. Basically what this is going to say is, does this show up in the line? So does ADDR type equals IPv4 show up in the line? If it does, then we want all of these other things to happen. We're then going to do a match. We're basically going to copy out a little snippet of what's in that line. We are then going to implode the results. So basically what happens here is, so what we're going to do is we're going to look at the line of the XML file. If this right here is in that line, then what we're going to do is we're going to go through and we're going to basically cut out a bit of that line. So ADDR equals double quotation marks, and then this is a wildcard. So 192.168.1.10, 192.168.1.20, whatever else. So it's going to basically cut this out, and then it's going to assign this to results. Results is actually going to be an array. So when we assign this to results, results is an array, so then we need to use the implode function. The implode function turns an array into a string. So basically here we turn this array into a string and then assign that value to IP. Then we're going to left trim off a little bit from that. So ADDR equals double quotation marks. We want to eliminate from that from the left side. Then R trim from the right side. We want to eliminate double quotation marks space ADDR type from the right side. And that is basically going to get us our IP address. And then here we're simply going to print out on the screen IP address. And so again, if we go over and we take a look at this, so this is where we print out the IP address, and that's how we're actually able to get that IP address. So we're going to go through, again, this is from the project that we just did. We're then going to get the vendor information like we did in the last project. Then we're going to get the MAC address information just like we did in the last project. Then we're going to get the host information just like we did in the last project. We're basically copying and pasting all of these. The only difference is we're looking for slightly different things, and then we're trimming slightly different things. And then we're going to get down to the ports. So basically the ports is where this gets a little bit interesting. So this is where we're going to be adding values to an array. So with this, basically what we have here is if string position has port ID in it, then we're going to go through and we're basically going to grab what that port ID is. Then we print out what the port ID is, but then what we also do is we take that value and with array underscore push, we add that value to the port array, right? So basically array underscore push, we take that port value and add it to port array. So what's happening here, see this? So this prints out 53. So it prints out 53 and then adds 53 to the port array. Then it prints out 80 and adds 80 to the port array. So the port array is now 53 and 80. It prints out 5,000 and also adds that to the port array. So the port array is now 53, 80, and 5,000. Right? Same thing as here. It prints out 5,000 and adds 5,000 to the port array. It prints out 7,000 and adds 7,000 to the port array. It prints out 7,100 and adds 7,100 to the port array. So by the end of this port array will be 5,000, 7,000, 7,100, 49,152, so on and so forth, right? So all of that gets added to that array. And so then we now have this one solid array that we can deal with. Then we're going to go down here, and this is where we are then going to put all of the values into the database. So up here we've simply been assigning values and then printing those values out onto the screen. Down here is where we finally get to the place where we're actually going to be inserting those values into the database itself. So with that, one of the things we have to look for is we have to look for what denotes the end of basically a host or a client computer in the XML file. So if we go over and we actually take a look at the XML file itself. So we open this with a text editor, right? So basically, again, with an XML file and whenever we're parsing, we have to find things that allow us to kind of put anchor points within that file, to basically that acts as landmarks so we know where we're at. And so one of the interesting things here is with host. So basically, if you look at this, everything is between host. So we have the host tag that opens up here, and then we have the close of the host tag here. And so basically what we know is everything between here is one host. So with this, it has an IP address, it has a MAC address, it has all of these different ports. So everything in here denotes one host. So what I'm saying is read through this file, and then when you see this, when you see /host, you know you're at the end of a particular host, and so now you can dump all of that information into the MySQL database table as a single record at one time. So that's what's going on here. So basically, if string position, if /host with a little arrow thing is there, it equals true. Then timestamp is going to equal time. So basically what I'm simply doing here is, again, I just simply want a timestamp. I'm using the time function from PHP, assigning that value to timestamp. And then port list. So this is what I'm actually going to be inputting into the database table. So remember, right now I have a list of ports in an array. But I have to take that array and I have to somehow put all of those values into the table. So what I'm going to simply do is I'm simply going to use that implode function. So just like up here with results, I kept using the implode function, use that same implode function for a port array. So this has all the values for that one particular host. One of the things that I'm doing here is I'm then saying with implode, the separator is going to be a comma space. So between the double quotation marks, this is what the separator is for all the values in an array. So I'm going to say I want it to be a comma space between all of these different values. I want to implode, and then that is going to be a port list. Why that's useful then is, again, if we go here and we take a look at the report, that's how we can see. So these are the ports that are open for this particular device. This is a single port that's open for this particular device. These are all the ports that are open for this particular device. So I had the port array, I imploded that array. All of the values were turned into a string with a separator of a comma space in between. So that's what's going on there. Then we're going to go down here and we're going to do this nasty long basically insert. So then our SQL statement is going to be insert into log IP. So these are all the field names: IP field, MAC field, vendor field, hostname field, ports field, timestamp fields, and then we're going to do values. So make sure to do the single quotation marks around all of your values, or you might run into problems. So then we're going to do the value for IP, the value for MAC, the value for vendor, the value for hostname, the value for port list, and the value for timestamp. Basically, if connection is true, so basically if this is able to go through and there's no problem, then we're simply going to echo out data added IP -mac -vendor -hostname -port list -timestamp break line else. So basically if there is an error, say what the connection error is. So that's where if we go and we take a look at the parse script, this is the data added. So basically if it's able to actually run through and be able to do the script, insert the data into the MySQL database table, then you will get this spit out at the end. If not, you will get an error. Then we're going to go down, and one of the most important things here is then we have to zero out all of the values for these different variables. So remember, when you're going through a loop, you've assigned a value to a variable. That variable does not automatically reset itself. So like one of the things you'll notice with the output is that not every device has a host name. So device here, this has a host name of _gateway. If we scroll all the way down, this has a host name of Ubuntu, right? But actually a lot of these devices don't have host names. So if I don't reset the values of the variables, I may get 20 computers that are called Ubuntu within this particular parsing script simply because I set the value of the host name to Ubuntu and then never reset it to anything else. So one of the things that I want to do at the end here is basically clear out all the values for these different variables so that I don't get weird duplications. So IP is simply going to be double quotation marks with a space in between. MAC the same, vendor the same, host name the same. The difference here is for port array. So again, we're dealing with a full-fledged array. So what we're going to do is we're basically going to destroy the array. So we're going to do unset. So the unset function essentially destroys the array port array, and then we're going to recreate the array port array, and we're going to call it we're going to say that it's an array. And then we're going to clear the port list. So the only kind of slightly complicated thing here is, again, kind of unsetting, basically clearing out that array and then recreating the array, but then this cleans everything out, so then when it loops through again, when it goes to the next host, you don't have any data left over from the last scan. Then finally, all the way at the end here, we're going to have the connection close. So this is closing the database connection. You're going to do that right before you close out the PHP script. If you don't put this in the right place, if you put this in different places, you will run into errors. So this is the script that will then parse all the values and actually dump it into the table. If we go over, and again, just to kind of show you what's going on with the table, we can then do select, let's say all from log, and we can see all these values here. Let me do preferences just to make this a little easier for you to see. Let's go down to 10. Let's do select. And so now you can see that this is the information actually in the MySQL database table itself. So what we have here is 192.168.1.1. Here is the MAC address for that. Here is the vendor for that. Here is the host name for it. And here are the ports. So again, the ports simply get dumped in as a string. And then you have the timestamp for when this was included. Then we have this MAC address is Apple. These are the ports that are open. Here's a MAC address here. This is Netgear. These are the ports that are open. We have this MAC address is an HP. This is my printer actually. It has all of these ports available. And again, we got the timestamp. So this is what it looks like once all of this information is put into the table itself. So now the question is how to then pull out the information from the table. So again, so if we're taking a look at this, this is the parsing script. This is a script that puts the information into the table, but now we actually want to create a report. So we want to be able to pull information out of the table. And that's where we go to the NMAP report.php script. So we go here and we take a look at this. Basically, this is a relatively simple script, only about 36 lines here. A lot of it looks exactly the same because a lot of it is simply the information required in order to actually be able to connect to the database. So of course we're going to open up the PHP. We're then going to feed all of the information for the MySQL database. We're then going to create a connection. We are then going to do the if there is an error, then fail out. Then we are going to create the SQL statement. So the SQL statement we're going to be dealing with now is simply select all from log. So log is a table, so we're simply going to select all from log. Then we're going to have a variable result, and that is going to be the connection query SQL. So we're going to take the SQL statement, we're going to basically do a query on it, and that is going to be sent over to result. I'm then going to have this variable called split trigger. Basically what this split trigger variable is going to do for me is it's going to allow me to split when these scans were done. So see how I have scan at 11:11:52, and all of these here have the exact same timestamp. Basically I'm able to do this using that trigger split variable to actually determine basically if all of the values are within the same timestamp, and then be able to split it off if they're not. I'll show you that in a second. So then what we're going to do, go down here. The first thing that we're simply going to do is we're simply going to say echo h1 nmap scan report. So if we go here, this is all we're doing. We're simply printing that out of the top to give us a report name. Then if result, so the result that we have from the SQL statement, number of rows is greater than 0. So basically, if there's actually something there, the very first thing that I want to do is echo the table tag. So this is going to do the table tag so that everything gets printed out in this nice, easy to read format here. Then while row equals fetch result fetch association. So basically what this is going to do is it's going to go through and it's going to grab each row that we've gotten from that SQL statement, and then we're going to print the things out on the screen. What we're going to say here is if row timestamp does not equal split trigger. And what we're going to do here is we're then going to echo out scan at date and whatever the timestamp is. So basically if timestamp, so the row timestamp does not equal split trigger, then I want to print out scan at, and this is basically the timestamp formatted using the date function. So when we're looking at it here, basically if the timestamp does not equal the split trigger, basically print this out that we're looking at. Then what I'm going to do is split trigger is then going to equal what the timestamp is. So basically what's going to happen is it's going to go through, initially split trigger is not going to equal anything. So the first time this runs, the first time it goes through, split trigger equals nothing. So obviously it doesn't equal the timestamp. So it'll print out the scanned at blah, blah, blah. Then split trigger is going to then equal what the timestamp is. So basically it's going to keep through. So it's going to print this, because initially split trigger is going to equal 0 and the timestamp is going to be whatever the timestamp is. So it prints this out. Then split trigger is now the same as timestamp. So it's just going to go through, it's going to loop, 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 loop until there's a new timestamp. At which point there's a new timestamp, then this is going to print out again. Split trigger is now going to equal the new timestamp. And then it's just going to keep printing out until it goes to the next timestamp where it doesn't equal, and then this will print out again, right? So basically, that's a way you can do a separator or something like that. So that's that. So basically, if that's what's going to happen. Otherwise, we're going to simply echo out, and we're going to do the line in the table row. So we're going to open up a table row, then the table cell, so TD, and then we're going to say row, and then the IP for that row. Then we're going to say row and the MAC in that row vendor in that row ports. So that's a string, ports in the row. And then we're going to do here row timestamp. So it's going to print out all of that. So basically we're taking a look at this. It'll print out the IP, it'll print out the MAC, it'll print out the vendor, it'll print out the ports, and then it will print out the timestamp, and it will go through. Then basically, once it's scanned through all of those, it's simply going to echo out and close the table. So again, make sure this whole table thing is outside that while loop. And then since we have the if the number of results is greater than 0, do this. We have an else, echo 0 records. So that just tells you if there's a problem there. And then we have a connection close, again, right before the end of the PHP script to actually close the connection to the MySQL database table. And so these are the scripts that then allow you to go through and parse the XML file, the NMAP output file, and this allows you to then read from it and actually print it out in a report. Again, this is not pretty. This is not what I would use in a production environment. In a production environment, I actually wouldn't print out all of this information. I would have this be done silently, and in a production environment, I would make much more useful reports here. This is not the most useful report, but this just shows you how you can read through the XML file, take the information in that XML file, put it into a MySQL database table, and then read out from that MySQL database table. In the next number of classes, we'll now actually be able to get into something a little bit more interesting with this information now that we have it in a database table. So there you go. I'm sure you're so smart. Everything is embedded in your brain right now, and you can just go and you can write out all the code simply from memory, right? Thankfully, we are in the modern world, and I have my own website, so all of the code and all of the information will be in the description at my website at elithecomputerguy.com. So you can go, you can take a look at the code there, you can copy and paste it into your own projects and go from there. Again, I had to learn a lot of stuff in technology before the modern world of the internet, and yeah. To say that you literally had to remember things and be able to then recode it out from your memory, that was actually a real thing back in the day. But in the modern world, we have copy-paste. Copy-paste is a beautiful thing. So to be clear, if there's anything today that you do not completely understand, go take a look at the code, take a look at the descriptions. I'll put information about the SQL statements to create the MySQL database table, how to create the user that we're using. I'll have the information. Again, I'll have the actual parsing script. I'll have the reporting script. I have all of that there. So hopefully if you read through it, again, as long as you understand how Linux works and you understand how PHP works and you understand how MySQL works, all of that information will be there. And then you can take it and modify it and see how it works for your particular projects. Again, I do think that this is an interesting thing to work with because this is something useful for IT professionals. Plus, it also shows you the basic skills on how to do something like parsing. So again, that's one thing to be thinking about as a technology professional is how can you learn things that will advance your career that also solves problems you currently have, right? So if you're an IT professional, scanning your network is a big deal. Understanding what ports are open on your network, understanding what users or what devices and what vendors and all that kind of stuff on your network is a big deal now, right? So you can use this to be able to scan your network in more or less real time and be able to understand what's going on with your network, which is very useful. But then by learning how to do parsing, being able to take that information and dump it into a database, that's actually good for your career going into the future because again, that's what a lot of these IT professionals do anymore. When you look at all the log files that get created, when you look at all the documentation, when you look at basically all of this data that gets created, a very important thing nowadays is simply being able to read through that data programmatically, being able to create scripts that read through data and then be able to output results somebody gives a crap about. Again, showing you that XML file. That XML XML file has a lot of information in it, but it's all embedded within all these XML tags and a lot of information that just isn't very valuable for you. So being able to pull out specific information can be very useful. Again, think about this in other things, in other output formats. How many basically text files, the equivalent of text files, do you have that has information that's very useful for you, but it's buried under this mass of non-useful information? And so the question is, how can you get the useful information out so that you can actually make decisions based off of it? That's where parsing comes in. And again, when you can parse a file and then you can turn that data that you got from the file into something that you can then put into a database, and then when you can start doing SQL statements based off of what's in the database, you really start getting into some really interesting and frankly some valuable things that you can accomplish. So again, whether you or not you're particularly infatuated with NMAP is not really the big thing here. I think what you can do with this can be very useful for you in any number of the ways going into the future. So anyways, with that, again, go take a look at the code. Go take a look, read through the code, see what I did. Go take a look at the code. And as always, I enjoy doing this class. Look forward to seeing you at the next one. If you like the content that I create, please think about going to eliTheComputerGuy.com and becoming a member or donating. Please understand that all of the educational videos are in front of the paywall. That includes the videos, that includes the notes, the diagrams, and the code example. All of that is freely available and in front of the paywall. But if you want to watch opinion videos or if you want to be able to comment, you do need to become a member. Membership is $5 a month or $60 a year and gives you access to those opinion videos and the ability to comment. If you don't want to become a member, you just want to give a one-time donation, there's also a donate button where you can do that. Please understand, in order to provide the education that I am, it does cost money. Servers cost money, equipment costs money, travel costs money. All of these things cost a reasonable amount of money, and the fact of the matter is YouTube's advertising program no longer supports creators the way that it used to. So if you want these classes to continue to stick around and you find them to be valuable, please think about either becoming a monthly member or donating a few dollars for this project.